Welcome back. I just want to give a quick shout out to just say welcome back to everybody. We're Taking Christmas Digital. If you are just joining us, this is our third and final session. If you missed the previous two sessions, don't worry, we'll send you videos. And we want to just say a thank you to our sponsors. First of all, Symposia Labs, thank you for putting this on. I actually work at Central Wesleyan Church as the Spiritual Formation Operations Director, so I'm just partnering with Symposia to put this on today. And then we're also really thankful to Baker Bookhouse, who I just clicked past, for sponsoring this event, and the Colossian Forum. These are both organizations that I would highly recommend if you are looking for resources, specifically for your small groups ministry. Both of these organizations are really going to help your ministry. Colossian Forum in particular has a new curriculum out for how to engage political things. And, there's nothing political going on right now. So, probably not that important. But no, I'm kidding. It's very important. And if you don't know what you're doing this fall, this is a great place to start. So we had planning. We are in session 3, actually. I know it says session 2. It lies. Planning for Christmas, your next steps. We are welcoming Jordan Kohler and Nathan Chansky. And if you missed it before, yes, Nate and I are related. I married his older brother, and, we're still friends. So go team. And Jordan, Nathan and I have both served in church communications world. Nathan, you were worked in church marketing at Resurrection Life Church, a major, large church in kind of in the Grand Rapids area. Yeah. And then Jordan, you are doing ministry at the local church in East Grand Rapids. Can you tell us a little bit about the local church?
Yeah, sure. So the local church, we are a church plant from Central Wesleyan Church. We are part of the Water's Edge network of churches, and we started 3 years ago, starting here on the east side of Grand Rapids. And so, we started off meeting at Calvin College in their one of their rooms on campus there, and we have progressed into owning our own space. And so now we are able to meet. And I remember our first Sunday that we were meeting at our own space. We didn't even have chairs yet. It was such a fast transition that we had everybody bring their own chairs. So people were showing up with random assortment of chairs, and we made it work.
So for those of you who are like, this has been all big church conversations, welcome to the smaller church conversation. And Nate, although you have lived in big church world, you are transitioning back into, we're going to say medium church world because our attendees are absolutely right. Shannon's got me cornered there, but you're transitioning back into that world a little bit as you are a newlywed and kind of figuring out what that looks like. So, but as a creative, so for Nathan, you're a photographer. You just do creative stuff, right?
Right.
Just
do creative stuff.
Extraordinaire. You do all this creative stuff, but you've got a background in ministry, and you've been a worship leader in a young adult ministry, correct? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So obviously, when I worked at the large area church in Granville called Resurrection Life, I worked again in their marketing and communications department. So obviously, when you work at a nonprofit like that, the positions aren't as specialized as perhaps like a digital creative agency. So you wear a lot of hats. So yeah, for me, what I was doing there was I was primarily a graphic designer, but then I was also acting as their photographer because I knew how to do that. And then I was also acting as kind of like their one of their marketing consultants, you could say. And so, yeah, it was kind of like you have to adapt and you have to learn a lot of different things. But kind of a shoot off of that was that I was also asked to try worship leading because I'd never done that before. But I had been approached by one of the worship leaders who said, hey, I've heard that you can sing. And we kind of have like this big gap of especially male worship leaders. There aren't a whole lot who are actually willing to do something like that. So would you be interested? So after turning down a couple times and then finally saying yes, that developed into something where I primarily focused on worship leading for the young adult ministry within Resurrection Life Church, which is called Access. So that was a really growing experience for me and a completely new spot that I'd never been in. So yeah, it was really cool to have both of those areas of kind of like the marketing side, the creative side at that church, but also like being right in front of people literally when you're on stage and you're leading people into the presence of God. Like that was like a whole different dimension of, I'd say, yeah, creativity. You know, a lot of it is using your creativity to serve the Lord. So yeah, it was a whole thing. But now, yes, like you said, I have nothing against the large church, but I would say that I think sometimes people is like the people at the church are just so important in the community. And I think at a lot of large churches, that's more of a battle to cultivate the community, the intimacy that perhaps a smaller church doesn't have to try so hard to do. So I'm not at all giving up on big churches, but I think right now where I'm at and where my wife's at, because obviously when you get married, it's not just you making the decisions, is we kind of followed a lot of people that had just came in our lives and have been there for us. And most of them came from a church, and it's a smaller church. Right. And the good part about that church is it's open right now. One of the few.
And so some of, again, here in Michigan, some of the smaller churches haven't been able to open.
Yeah, exactly.
I haven't done as much, but
yeah.
Jordan, well, we're going to transition back to you, Jordan, because we're looking at Christmas. Okay, so we're 4 months out from Christmas, and we got to figure it out. We got a blank piece of paper, and a lot of these folks here today are like, okay, I got to start somewhere. You're at TLC. What were your pre-COVID attendance numbers, Jordan? What were you guys running?
We were probably averaging 450 pre-COVID. Okay.
And that's up from, you guys are, like, to give some perspective, you were planted, 3 years ago?
Yes.
So that's up from 75, I think we sent you?
Yeah, I think, that was the original number. So, we've been slowly growing over the years. We ended up moving to 2 services sooner than we thought we were going to have to. Primarily because our space can't contain that many people in one service. So that was partially it. And then, of course, like everybody, those numbers fluctuate. Michigan summers are beautiful, and everybody's like, I'm not going to be at church all summer. And then we have a large millennial population as well. And so a lot of that revolves around college seasons and school years.
Yeah. So tell me how you've worked the Central system. So you know how we do Christmas at Central. But tell me how that differs in your small church world. So you're starting with a blank piece of paper. You're at a smaller church.
Yeah.
Where do you start when you're planning for Christmas?
Yeah, that's such a good topic. The idea of starting to create for Christmas now is such a good thing, even though nobody probably wants to think about all that snow unless you're one of those weird people who
we got some people in Florida. They're like, we're going to go Christmas caroling.
Listen, we're like, I'm going to move down to Florida. I'm happy, all right, to do that. If I can get away from the snow, that's great. So for me to start planning now for Christmas is painful because I don't want to think about the snow. But here we are, and so I'm going to do that. So we actually even started thinking about our Christmas service just a little while ago, and we started to do that. So when I think about just starting from the beginning with a blank sheet of paper, so to speak, I think about a number of different things. And I guess maybe what I would suggest for those churches that are smaller and they're not from the large church, they don't have multiple staff, they're not able to just pull a bunch of stuff together. And I worked at large churches where we had a budget and it was simply like, oh, let's do that idea. Well, that costs a few $1,000s. All right, well, let's do it. We have the money to do it. And now we're looking at a budget that is so much different, right? So next to nothing. And so we're like, how do we pull this off? So one of the things that I would suggest is to really start, one of the things that I learned a long time ago, and I really believe that this transcends any church size that you're at. And in fact, it's really applicable to smaller churches. And so if I'm starting with a blank sheet of paper, what I'm going to do is I'm going to gather people together. What I want to do is I want to practice ideation. And maybe you have talked about that already, I'm not sure, but the idea of ideation is just the gathering and the formation of ideas. So one of my favorite pastors is Erwin McManus over at Mosaic Church in California. And he's like my life goal, right? I just want to be that guy someday when I get older.
Yeah.
But he has a great book called The Artisan Soul. And I recommend, if you're working at a church in any kind of creative capacity, read that book. In it, he talks about how everybody is an artist. Everybody can be creative because we're made in the image of God, who is a creative God. And so we always start with that foundation. And because once you recognize that, then everybody who you might not normally think of yourself as being creative, you go, I am creative. I can be creative. So I want to gather people who I believe are creative, and I want them to start helping me plan and process that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold a creative session with just some people, either maybe just a couple of my staff on my team, or more likely I'm going to try to invite people from my church, and I'm going to handpick them out. So I'm going to make sure that they're not all just people like me, that they don't just all think like me and have the same things that I like to do and think that I want a diversity of mindsets. I want a diversity of outlooks, okay? So don't be afraid to include those people who would not normally think of themselves as creative people. You want to include them as well. So of course you're going to want to, like, if you have anybody in your community, in your church, that is an artist, like Nate, like a photographer, a designer, writers, people who blog, you want good storytellers, invite those people to be a part of this meeting, that's for sure. But then look beyond that. Think about getting, do you have anybody in construction? Get a builder to be on your team at that session. Teachers are really, really creative. They have to be creative with their classes. Bring one of them on. I always go after creative moms. Like, moms are incredible. Like, I don't know if you've even been on Pinterest lately, like, look at what the moms have done. That's awesome. They're like the queens of creative. And so just find those people and bring them into your teams, okay? And then you're going to hold a creative meeting. And it might sound really daunting, like, well, what am I supposed to do with that? It's just, the goal is this. You're trying to get the most amount of ideas that you possibly can get in an hour. So keep it to an hour, because you want this like flash bang firework explosion of creative. You don't want it to draw on and people are getting, tired, and then you don't get anything good. You just want to capture that flash, that bang explosion of creativity, and then you want to end it. Okay. And you can follow up on everything else later. That's fine. But you're just trying to do that. So you get everybody together, you start throwing out ideas. And there's different ways you can kind of bring that about, but you're just throwing out ideas. Christmas time, what does that look like? This and this and this. Pretty soon you're filling up that blank sheet of paper. What I like to do is grab those big sticky Post-it notes, and I'm just going to get a big blank wall. I'm going to post them all over. And we're going to talk about our space. What does our space look like? What are the feelings we want to evoke out of this thing? What are some images that come to mind? All that kind of stuff. We're just going to start creating ideas, and we're just going to fill up that paper, and we tell people, no idea is a bad idea. And we always plan as if we have an unlimited budget, which we don't, but we plan that way because we don't want to limit. We don't want to put a cap on people's creativity. And so we're just going to fill up that paper. And by the end of that hour, I will probably have anywhere between 10 to 50 ideas or more. Now, if I'm being honest, I'm going to look at that paper and I'm really quickly going to go, that won't work. That's a dumb idea. I'm not going to do that. We could never do that. Whatever. Try to suppress all of those feelings and all of those knee-jerk reactions. And if you've been in ministry for a long time, really quickly what may or may not work. Just ignore that, okay? And then you're going to marinate on those ideas. And then you might actually take that list and you're going to run it by a few different people. So for me, I'm going to run it by my lead pastor. We actually have a couple full-time staff members. I'm going to run it by my whole staff, my whole team. If I didn't have that option, I probably always have a lead pastor to run it by, or I'm going to maybe pull in a few different other people who weren't part of that creative meeting. And I might just say, hey, we're thinking about Christmas in our service. You've maybe been a part of one before, whatever. So what do you think about these ideas? We're thinking about this. And I might talk them through some of these. And you never know, that one idea that you might have thought was super ridiculous and impossible to pull off might actually hype somebody up, and they might get super passionate. And you never know, they might be like, we could do that. That's awesome. That would be great.
Yeah.
And we can pull that off. So that's kind of like what I would start with, a blank sheet of paper. And then I'm going to, start to, from there, try to play those ideas out in a way that, hey, I'm going to start asking around. I'm going to pull people in, resources of people, because that idea that somebody really likes, they might go, oh, that's so crazy. But you know what? I know somebody who knows somebody who has that thing, or whatever it might be. And so, you're going to start having those conversations, and pretty soon you can pull stuff together with very little money and actually make some creative things happen. And what I always like to, again, just remind ourselves, if we're starting with a blank sheet of paper, having worked at large churches, we live in a culture that is so entertainment based. We live in a culture that's so entertainment driven. And we often feel like if we can't match that kind of entertainment quality, if we can't entertain people to that same quality that our culture can do, then we're just not going to try anything. And a lot of times simple is so much better for small churches, because it's more accessible, and it really can have a lot more gains than it does to try to pull off this big, super huge kind of production. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think those have their own place and everything. But for us, we try to take a completely different approach with that. We're trying to evoke feelings and ways that we can do that. So we always try to involve, especially at Christmas time, we try to involve kids as well. So there was one year that we tried, just to try to give you an example, right? Something practical. We thought, like, how do we evoke feelings, right? Like, think about something that evokes some feelings. And so we thought about sitting around a campfire. I don't know, it just came to mind. Sitting around a campfire, and what are the feelings that are evoked around a campfire, right? You're sitting, the smell of the smoke, the warmth of the fire, the glow on people's faces. Maybe you have a sweet treat that you're eating. You're together with people that you enjoy, that you love. And maybe you're kicking back and you're looking up and you see the stars. Like, what are the feelings that invoke? And can we in our creativity, can we create some of that stuff? Can we replicate some of that stuff?
Yeah.
And so for one year for us, we're like, let's do that. Let's create a campfire on our stage. And so we just asked around. We had some people chop up some logs, and we created like a log, seating benches around on the stage. We got like this fake fireplace thing that looked like it had waving. It was probably like paper or plastic. I don't remember what it was. And again, Pinterest is a big help for that. And it barely costs us anything to do that, because we have people help make it. And then we realized that around the campfire is where stories are told. And so we really wanted to tell the Christmas story, but we wanted to involve kids. So we invited all the kids at the service there up onto the stage. They all sat on the benches, and then we plopped one of our staff members down in a chair, and we read a kid's story to the kids. And it was an instant way of just getting them interacting. They thought it was awesome. It keeps them from going bonkers in the service, right? And you're able to tell a Christmas story in a kid's way, and all the adults are sitting there like, yeah, okay, this is fun. I like this. It brings out the kid in me or whatever. So that's just a way of, again, we could start with something simple, and it leads to one thing to the next. And then pretty soon you can pull something off that doesn't take a huge amount of effort and weeks and weeks and weeks of preparation and rehearsals to pull off.
Yeah. And so I'm hearing you say things like bringing in lots of people to help, even people who aren't on staff. I loved the moms thing. As a mom who is definitely a creative, and I love being in those creative meetings, I can attest the things we have to do with popsicle sticks to get our 2-year-olds to sit still in various places. Leverage the moms in your congregation, but bringing in new people. And I love the ideation. So we heard from Central in the first session, we heard a lot about their initial planning meeting, but we didn't get to hear as much about the creative side. So I love hearing that, just getting everything on literally the blank piece of paper. And that is so awesome. We had actually an awesome question come up that Nate, I would like you to speak to this. It's a little bit more of a theological question. I'm going to limit your time here, Nate. You've got 1-2 minutes to kind of verbally process this a little bit, and then Jordan will you. No, it'll be good. But Becca's asking about the word stage. So stage is very much a big church word. There's no stage. They don't have an altar. It's very much, how do you navigate stage and performance with worship? And both of you have been worship leaders, but I know, Nate, this is something that you've wrestled through a lot over the years. But how do you navigate that performance line versus worship as we're preparing for this Christmas season?
Oh, wow. Well, I mean, generally speaking, and I'm just going to like shoot it out because I don't have much time, but I think when I first started in worship leading, the reason that I first initially turned it down is because my history in music or in any sort of anything that involved a stage was performance based. And so whether it was musical theater or whether it was like some sort of variety show or being part of a band or anything like that, it was always I get up there and I'm a character, right? And so I didn't have to be myself. And so I put on this like persona, and that is how you like entertain people. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But then when it came to worship leading, it was like very different for me because I'm someone who like almost to a fault like dies to my authenticity. If there's a situation that calls for authenticity and I'm not, I just feel like I've done everyone wrong. So I think what it came down to with worship leading was like, you have to suddenly be yourself in front of everyone and you have to be vulnerable, and you're not putting on a character anymore. You're actually putting your relationship with Christ almost on display a little bit. And that's uncomfortable for a lot of people. Like myself, it was really uncomfortable right at first. But I think after a while, it became something that the Lord really used. So yes, I 100% do think there is a distinction between performance and worship leading, because again, you're dealing with something, you're dealing with God's glory. And when you deal with God's glory, that's like very, that's just important to deal with that carefully. Obviously, like in the Old Testament, I think it was a man named Uzzah who, when the ark stumbled, he tried to grab it and he was actually struck dead because he didn't take God's glory seriously enough. And obviously we don't still live in those times, but I think, the Old Testament does point us to some good just takeaways for what we deal with today of God's glory. So yes, I do think there's a distinction. I don't think you can navigate that perfectly as a human. We're flawed, but so hopefully I answered that question
No,
clearly.
I think that's great. I mean, when we're starting with a blank piece of paper and, so much of what we do in ministry when we're preparing for Christmas is, we're putting on an event in some ways, even though, it's a Christian service, it is an event. And so thinking about it in terms of what's our objective again, and being authentic. We didn't touch tons of authenticity in the marketing side, but that's a very important question. Jordan, I'm going to punt this. We got another great question. We got great questions coming in this time. I love it. So Carmen is asking, do you do an Advent series every year? And how do you keep the story fresh while not straying from the biblical narrative? So Jordan, how do you navigate that at TLC? I know that's something that you guys look at each year.
Yeah, so we've been celebrating the season of Advent in every church that I've been a part of for a number of years. And yes, it gets incredibly redundant. And I think that is part of the difficulty and challenge. Even Christmas, I mean, even if you're not celebrating the themes of Advent, the idea and the story of Christmas every year and trying to create something different, because people have heard, everybody's heard it. They've heard it over and over and over again. So you have to do that. But the wonderful thing about creativity is that it says we can do it different. We can do it better than we have before. And so I just encourage people to, when they get to that, and Easter is a similar type of a thing. How do you tell this story differently? First of all, don't be afraid of what the story is, because the story is the point. The story is the point. I would not shy away from that in the least. In trying to be different, trying to be creative can never overshadow the importance of the story. You have to let that take front and center. However, the package and the avenue that story can take can be different, and it can be creative. So one of the things I encourage is to start thinking differently. That's just a really big piece of it for us. We start thinking differently. So every year, I'm just a huge proponent of at Christmas time. I don't want the Christmas look. For me, that's just how it goes. I'm tired of that. But Advent brings up the same themes, right? We have waiting, the idea of waiting, anticipation, love, hope, joy, peace. Those are so, and those are every year. So they can kind of get redundant, but how do we be creative in those? So for instance, one year, and this was at a previous church that I was at, but again, this is an example of not a huge budget type of a thing, but we were able to be like ultra creative with it. So we were thinking about Advent and this idea of waiting and what could that look like? And we kind of took it in a different direction. We started thinking about the idea of waiting and arriving, this concept of arriving, right? We're waiting for Christ to arrive. That's a theme. That's a central focus of that. And so we just started kicking around. What does that make you think of when you think of arriving? And so that led us to one of the biggest places that you ever have to wait at, which is an airport, right? You're constantly waiting. You're waiting and waiting and waiting. You're waiting for your plane to arrive, or you're waiting for your family to get off the plane and welcome them back home. You're waiting for a layover, whatever. You're waiting for an arrival. And even at an airport, there's signs, arrivals and departures. So we thought, wouldn't it be fun to be creative and just make our whole like outlook for Christmas like this idea of an airport in waiting for the arrival of Christ. That's not Christmassy at all, the image of an airport or anything like that. And we didn't try to keep it that way, but we kind of made our stage like look like a runway. And then we're like, we got one of those crazy ideas on the blank sheet of paper was an airplane. What if we could get an airplane? Okay, that just sounds ridiculous. You'd scratch it off. But then what did we do? We started asking around. And what we found was that we had one guy in the church who actually had built a small fake airplane for a parade float that he just had chilling in a barn. So all we had to do was figure out how to rig that sucker from the rafters, and it looked like it was flying and landing on the stage.
Oh my gosh.
It cost us whatever the cost of some rope and cables did. Okay. And then a lot of prayer that it didn't fall down after that. So, but all of a sudden we created like an atmosphere and a foundation for us to then tell the Advent story in a completely different focus. And that was kind of like our package. And so then all of our songs about waiting and arrival all of a sudden felt like a fresh meaning and outlook. The scriptures that we read that were based on that took a fresh perspective because of the wrapper that we put it in. And again, the story wasn't any different, but the theme, the package was a little bit different.
For those of you who aren't watching the chat, Robin also shared a couple fun ideas that their church has done. We do sermon series each year for Advent. One year was based on the Grinch, Growing Your Heart 3 Sizes. Last year did a Nutcracker theme based on the book, The Gift, the Nutcracker. I know we've done some other fun things. Last year's was very much just based on the idea, I think it was last year we did one that was just based on the idea of eyes, of looking at Christmas, an Advent series of looking at Christmas through the eyes of different people who were engaging with the story, which was really interesting. And our final service really looked at the story of the people who owned the place where Jesus was born, hearing their version of it. And so a lot of fun, creative ways to do that. Keep bringing your questions in. I want to punt back to Nate because we have you, Nate, and you're not just because, of our relation, like you're my brother-in-law, but also because you're probably one of the best church photographers I've ever encountered. Talk to me about,
oh, please.
Talk to me about how we should be recording this experience, how we should be taking pictures, and how does that change in the COVID era? I don't know if you've done any photography now with people in masks and things like that, but how would you take pictures? Like, should I even care about taking pictures at my church service? Like, why is that something that I should even care about?
Sure. Well, I'd say, first of all, are you kind of asking how it would change if the standard congregation size was not there, or if none of the congregation was there, or
address all of that, because we probably have a lot of different experiences here, right? We have some churches that are meeting and some that are not meeting.
Sure. Well, what I would probably do, and again, I don't think I'm any expert, but this is probably what I would do right off the bat, is I would make sure that, like, let's say if there was no one there, but the crew and the pastor and the worship team. I think what I would do is I would try everything I can to get just the kind of material that makes the atmosphere a little bit more intimate for people when you're maybe sharing those images later. So maybe I'd get more of a tight shots out of things. I'd really try to emphasize that the Lord is still moving there on those days, even if the people aren't there. I'd also try to emphasize just like what the crew is doing. Maybe get some, I'm sure the worship team is going to be praying beforehand, get some of those shots. I mean, something that was always maybe frustrating as a large church photographer was that there's a lot of shots you kind of have to like get from afar because there's people, you don't want to be a distraction. I wasn't even allowed to go on the stage at Res. And so I think that's something that can change in the event that the people aren't actually there on the day that it's being recorded, because again, what you can do is you can go a little bit more behind the scenes and you can give a little bit more of like the heart behind what's happening. And I think people love to see that. I think people love to see that their church is actually a group of living, breathing people that are running the show. And not only that, like I would say, if we're talking about smaller churches, people in the congregation who maybe are listening from afar, they're a lot more likely to know personally those that are either the worship leaders or those that like the pastor or even the tech crew or whoever it might be, depending on the size of the church. And so I think a lot of those kind of like just more intimate shots, just carefully curated shots are going to be really important, especially if people can't be there on that day. I think obviously live is great, video is great, but I still believe there's something special and powerful about still images that people really connect with. And sometimes they can say things that even a video can't. So.
Yeah. And, it's a great thing to hear after, Jessica talked to us about the importance of video in the last session, but she also talked about the importance of having imagery that helps people understand what your church experience is going to be like if you attend this church. And, one of the things that we've done at Central, and in fact, you've done for us, Nate, is coming in and spending a Sunday with us to take photographs. And so that we have them available for our website and social media to use over time, which is just such a valuable thing.
Yeah.
We are running low on time. And so the one question we've been asking all of our panelists all morning is if everyone was to go forth from this last session today and they're going to go do one thing, and I think we're going to get them out a little bit before 1. So it's, right as soon as this ends, they need to do one thing to prepare for Christmas. What would that be? And Nate, we'll start with you, and then Jordan will finish up with you. Sorry, Nate, but here you go.
Oh my goodness.
One thing, and you can only pick one.
Thing. Oh goodness, can I be general about it?
Yes, you can be general.
Okay, so I, when Jordan was talking about just like the ideation, that's something that I really connected with, and that's something that I wrote down before we met, and not necessarily specifically ideation, but still along the same lines. There are people, and especially in a small church, even though you think there are people in there who have a lot to give. That's why it's called the body of Christ, because there are different members that make up the whole body. And it's kind of like a treasure to find them. And it's kind of like you just have to like find the gold somewhere or find the diamonds in the rough, but they're there. And I think everybody has something to give. And there's a lot more creative people out there than you think. And there's a lot more that people have to give than you think. So that's the one thing I would say is like, find those people and get those people mobilized. And I know one of my friends who I worked with at Res, she would have been perfect for this. She works at a like a startup church, I would say, over in Allendale called Life West. And so she was just kind of picked out of the crowd, like, hey, you know how to do this kind of stuff. Like, do you think you could do some creative for us? And so now that's what she does for them. And I know they utilize a lot of people like that. So that's the one thing I would say is find the gold within your community. I know it's there. And I think you'll be pleasantly surprised.
There it is. Find your gold. So put it out a call, start looking for people that can help you with this, because you don't have to be alone. All right, Jordan, everyone needs to do one thing. And you're saying that one thing needs to be what?
The one thing, that's great. Thanks, Nate. I think too that maybe I love to think practical. For me, like I'm a list guy, so I need to have some practical steps. So if I'm thinking about one thing that I need to do to prepare for Christmas and just creative planning, I would encourage everybody to sit down between now and Christmas. And this is going to sound crazy, right? But find an hour or a half an hour once a week between now and Christmas to start giving time to this. I mean, it's really as simple as that. A lot of the reasons why we don't end up being creative with our services because we just don't have the time and space. And I get it. Life is busy. Everything else creeps into it. But if you can find a half an hour to an hour, sit down, just undistracted, and say, I'm going to open up my laptop. I'm going to grab out a piece of paper, and I'm just going to start writing down some thoughts that I have. And I'm going to steal like an artist, right? There's a book out there that's called Steal Like an Artist, and you cannot be afraid to do that. So what I mean is go online, start looking at what other churches have done, start looking up some ideas, just start to let Google be your best friend. And you're going to write down just a lot of stuff. And you're going to start over time, hopefully over the next couple months, you're going to start to see some things emerge and some things that start to connect, and you start to go, oh, hey, last week I looked at this video, and this week I looked at this liturgy piece or this piece of poetry or this scripture, and that's awesome. And maybe it'll lead to something else, maybe it'll lead to like what Nate was saying. You might actually need to spend an hour getting to know some of those people in your congregation who do stuff. One time we needed videos we wanted some video footage of Grand Rapids. Well, I don't have that capability of doing that, but we found out somebody in our church has some killer drone footage of Grand Rapids. So he let us use it. So that's awesome. You can ask around and let people do that. And in that planning and processing, as you're sitting down for an hour, don't think that you have to go for this grand, amazing experience. Just try to be as simple as you can and focus on what you are able to do, and then kind of draw your creativity out of that. I know for us this year, we're not looking to do something big and grand. We don't even know. We're planning on doing live services for Christmas, but we don't know if that's actually going to take place 100% or not. So for us, we sat around the table. There was 3 of us. We had our laptops, we had our journals open, and we gave it a little bit of time. And for us, what we thought of was, man, at the end of this year, Christmas this year is going to be the end of 2020. And I think we can all agree that 2020 has been a crazy year, and we're all happy to see it go and to see it end. Okay. And so we thought, man, we're tired. We're sad. We're discouraged in a lot of ways. It'll be after the election, so everything else will be amplified. And we're just thinking like, we're going to be weary. And we wrote down this line from A Christmas Carol, "O Holy Night," that says, "A weary world rejoices." And for us, we're like, yeah, that's it. We're going to use that as our anchor, our foundation. At the end of 2020, we are going to be a weary world, but we're rejoicing because Jesus brings us hope. And so just take those little nuggets, take those little pieces as you just let your brain wander once a week, and then start to see what you can come up with.
Jordan, that is such a great, perfect ending to this whole day, because that's how we started. As we said, how do we plan for Christmas in the era of COVID? And the answer is start right now. So today, for those of you who have joined us all morning, whether you joined us for 1 or 2 sessions, we just want to say thank you so much. Make sure that you are if somebody shared this with you, make sure that you're registered to receive the recordings. We have additional content coming from Central Wesleyan Church. They're sharing a ton of resources with us about our process, our creative process. So that's Symposia Labs, Taking Church Digital. So be sure that you're registered there. Check your email. Don't let us go into your spam folder. And reach out if you have additional questions, you have you need more help with someone, you want somebody to come and brainstorm. I think Jordan will tell you brainstorming meetings are my favorite. I will sit with you guys on Zoom, or I'll drive to wherever you are. We can brainstorm and have some fun, or get you connected to somebody close by you who can do that as well. So you are not alone, and get started right now. So we just want to say thank you so much. Thank you, Jordan and Nate. Thank you to all of you who joined us today. And we just want to say we're praying for you over Christmas, and let us know how we can support you.